live on a recorded podcast from high above the sea-level offices of Steel Scorpion Sports. This is your Week 7 Steel Scorpion Sports podcast with hosts Jeff Miller and Mark Heflin. That's right, sports fans. It's time for the Steel Scorpion Sports Week 7 podcast. I'm your San Diego host, Jeff Miller.
I'm your San Jose host, Mark Heflin.
And Hef, it's Monday night. The Monday night football game has completed with the rousing win by the Steelers over the Houston Texans. So congratulations to the Steelers for coming back on the winning train. And I'd like to welcome all our listeners back after our week-long hiatus. We're just going on the same schedule as Major League Baseball, doing about a podcast a week, similar to their game per week. And with that, Hef, let's just jump right into the week. I know you have some stats around the gambling lines that you may want to touch on now that we are no longer doing the Guess the Line game that we did in honor of Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal. Now that they're back on the air, we'd like to welcome them back and let them take their rightful place back at the top of the line guessing game. But we'll keep going with our gambling stats, so why don't you get us started with what we saw after Week 7.
All right, so in Week 7, it was pretty much kind of a 50-50 week, if you will. In Week 7, the favorites were 7 and 8 against the spread, and the overs were also 7 and 8. Bringing our year-to-date totals for the favorites now through Week 7 are 52, 51, and 3, which is about as even as you can possibly get. And so Vegas clearly knows what they're doing when they're setting these lines. And the overs year-to-date are now 57 and 49, so a little better than the favorites versus the dog. You know, a little bit of a preference for the overs so far. You know, people were proclaiming this to be the year of the underdog, but so far through Week 7, we're not really seeing it. The biggest pattern that has stuck out through Week 7 is that there have been 22 Thursday, Sunday, or Monday night primetime games through Week 7, and the overs are 18 and 4. So clearly that is the biggest trend. 18 out of 22 have gone over. So if you want a better primetime game, bet the over.
So what you're telling me is short prep for the Thursday game or long prep for the Sunday and Monday games leads to more points.
Seems to be that way. I don't know exactly kind of the root cause of the situation, or if it's something that's, you know, I said bet the over, but maybe, you know, Vegas obviously probably knows about this well. The numbers tend to regress towards the mean. You got to figure this trend is going to continue for the whole season. So I think I'm going to quickly reverse course here and say, actually, maybe you should start consider betting the under because Vegas is going to adjust. Like I said, you know, regression to the mean. So go ahead and hop on that under train now. Go ahead and take advantage of it.
All right, are there any teams that you've noticed trending one way or another this season?
The Colts are now 6-1 against the spread. They seem to, you know, the last few games they've come in pretty easily. They were 3-point favorites against the Bengals. Blew them out of the water this week. They were 3-point favorites, or 3 to 3.5. I don't remember what the final number went off as, but 3 to 3.5 point favorites against the Ravens. That game was a little bit closer, but again, they were kind of in control of the game the whole way. They led for most of the game. They covered that. And so, yeah, they just have one loss against them, and that was the Eagles game in Week 2, the game that they actually had a chance of winning that one against the North as well, if not for kind of a late controversial no call on pass interference. And then the Jaguars had not covered any spreads until actually the last couple of weeks, and now they've come spread 2 weeks in a row. And, you know, they were home dogs against the Browns this week, and they won straight up.
All right, sports fans. So Uncle Hef says get on the under train for the primetime games and keep betting the Colts to win and apparently jump on the Jaguars while they're hot. And speaking of lines, Mark, many of our listeners will know that I got to rename your team after our contest, and last week you became Tom Brady is greater than Peyton Manning, which leads me into my discussion of said Peyton Manning. Is there anything you'd like to say about the 510 touchdown passes Peyton Manning has now thrown after the Sunday night game and how he is less than Tom Brady?
I do want to touch on that, but I will briefly say thank you for the name change. I don't actually like the name, and I disagree with it, and I think it's a lie and a misrepresentation of the facts. However, I did actually win the week in this this week. I got the 11 wins. I was the highest scoring team this week. So whatever it is, I had my old name had bad karma. For some reason, my new name, although I completely disagree with it, has good karma. So I look to continue this trend for the rest of the season and hopefully make a epic comeback into the playoffs. As far as Peyton Manning, ad nauseum over the last 24 hours, little spin that I will note is that Peyton now has the single game, well, he has it tied with a few other quarterbacks, but he is tied with the single game passing touchdown record. He owns the single season, now owns the career passing touchdown record. So he has the trifecta of passing touchdown records. At ProFootballReference.com today, looking at the list of the all-time passing touchdown leaders, and I found it kind of interesting that of the all-time leaders, 8 of the top 28 are currently active. And so I just think that kind of shows how, obviously we know that it's, becoming more of a passing game, but it just shows when 8 of the top 28 are current players that it really is becoming so much more of a passing game. But then I look at the age of some of these players. A lot of them are in their, kind of late 30s. Some of them, their careers are starting to wind down. But Peyton Manning is playing the best football of his career, basically, at this point. He turns 38 during this season. Do you think he can get to 600? He's at 510 now, but I think if he plays 2 more seasons, he could get there.
Well, he's averaging about 3 touchdown passes a game since he went to Denver. So you figure this year he's going to tack on another, let's say, 30, give or take. That gets him to 540-ish after this season. It would only take another season and a half to get to 600 after that. So do I believe he can get to 600? I do, and I think many of our listeners probably are also Peter King readers from the Monday Morning Quarterback, and Peter King had some good stats around that, pointing out on rebuilding his mechanics, and so he's actually playing with better mechanics than he did in the last few years in Indy. If that's the case, watch out NFL. And for the point about, he keeps mentioning how Aaron Rodgers or someone else will come along, but if you see how many touchdowns they're behind already and he's still adding to it, it's not as if they're closing the gap. In fact, last year Aaron Rodgers would have lost ground to Peyton Manning. So honestly, there aren't many quarterbacks out there that you could even foresee having a chance. The one that some people have brought up, which would be an interesting symmetry, would be Andrew Luck. And I assume that means about 15 years from now, Andrew Luck will get released or traded to the Broncos to finish out his career and break Peyton Manning's record.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll happen. We'll see. Hopefully, as a Colts fan, I'd like Andrew Luck spent the rest of his career with the Colts. One more thing I'll note on this list that I'm looking at Pro Football Reference. Eli Manning and Philip Rivers, both from the 2004 draft, are currently sitting at 18th and 21st all time. Eli 18th, Philip at 21. They're both 33 years old. They're just a few touchdowns apart. Eli has 243, Philip has 8. But when I look at the people ahead of them, they're both easily finished in the top 10 all time, which is kind of another reflection of the passing game is evolving. But kind of makes you wonder, are they headed for the Hall of Fame? Obviously, Eli has 2 Super Bowl rings, and when he finishes top 10 in passing TDs, that'll probably put him in. Philip Rivers does not have any rings yet, but the rate he's going to, like I said, easily finish probably around the 7th or 8th most passing touchdowns when he retires. So it'll be interesting. Right now we have kind of a wide receiver logjam in the Hall of Fame. Guys like Marvin Harrison not even getting in on the first ballot. If we're going to see kind of a QB logjam, maybe 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I do wonder if we're going to see the quarterback stats devalued a bit because of the new era. Clearly a Peyton Manning and a Brady and an Aaron Rodgers type are head and shoulders above the rest. But when you think of the great quarterbacks in the league, do you Eli Manning? Because I don't. And I don't think Philip Rivers. When I look at their body of work, I don't think Hall of Fame quarterback.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely not the first thing to come to mind. I mean, obviously Eli has a little bit of a case with the 2 Super Bowl rings. Although, interestingly, both of those rings were with Giants teams that were by no means world beaters. I know one of the teams was 9-7. I think the other one was around there as well, maybe 10-6. And they just kind of got hot at the right time and had a pretty good defense as well that he kind of rode to a Super Bowl. But I think when you combine him finishing 7th or 8th all time in passing touchdowns plus 2 Super Bowls, he's going to get in. But some of the other QBs are kind of wondering. Philip Rivers, Brett is quickly rising up the passing touchdown list, as is Tony Romo, and so it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens to them down the line.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to watch. Again, I don't think of them as Hall of Fame quarterbacks. You may be right on the Eli angle because of the 2 Super Bowl rings, but again, I think we put a lot of stock in Super Bowl rings in what people say is the ultimate team game. So in the ultimate team game, we're going to reward Eli for being on a good team, but we're going to punish Phillip Rivers for not being on a good team, or in a different scenario, another player that's put up similar numbers but plays for a team without a good defense. This goes back to, unfortunately, I'll make your Peyton Manning, Tom Brady argument for you. This goes back to that argument. Everyone always says, well, Peyton played with better weapons. Well, Tom Brady always played with a better defense and a better coach. So in a league, especially in the early 2000s, when Tom Brady was winning Super Bowls, he had a great defense and an effective enough passing game and offense with a great mind in Bill Belichick, and really a running game with Corey Dillon at a time when running was still important. That's how they won the Super Bowls. If you look back at Brady's stats, when he started becoming the prolific passer is when they haven't won. So it is funny that way, whereas Peyton never had a good defense. He's had to carry teams to the Super Bowl. This year might be the best defense he's ever had. And I think we're seeing the Broncos are the best team in the AFC.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add on that because you're pretty much preaching to the choir on that one. I've long held that, like you said, football is the ultimate team sport. There's 22 different starters on offense and defense, not even to mention, bringing in the nickel cornerbacks and the punter and the kicker and the long snapper, just all different guys. And obviously the QB is the leader of the team, but there's so many other facets to the game. The one other thing I'll add as well is that, not only has Peyton had lesser defenses for a lot of his teams, but he spent the majority of his career, and pretty much all of his career in Indianapolis, playing for 2 very conservative head coaches in Tony Dungy and Jim Caldwell. And, as a Colts fan and having watched most of his games, it would be very frustrating at times when there were situations where 4th down and he would want to go for it, and the team would choose to punt or to kick a field goal. And just so many situations where if Peyton could have had full controls, and he is kind of an offensive coordinator on the field, but it does become the coach's decision as far as some of those things, that's whether they want to go for it or not. But if he just was with a medium aggressive coach, I think the results could have been a lot more. But I think it's a what if game. We'll never know. In Denver, John Fox, I kind of figured is somewhat of a conservative coach as well, but he seems like he's been more willing to get on board and be aggressive and let Peyton kind of go for first down sometimes when he wants to.
Yeah, and you did mention it's the ultimate team game, and there was another game this weekend that I want to jump to that kind of highlighted that, and that'll get us into our next topic as well. I'm assuming at this point everybody has seen the St. Louis-Seattle highlights. And speaking of the ultimate team game, how about faking a punt return to one side of the field and leaving Stedman Bailey to catch it over his shoulder on the other side of the field, knowing the tendencies of the kicker and the kicking game, and having all your blockers play their role perfectly to fool the kick coverage team, and then you get an easy return touchdown that actually pretty much wins you the game, because that set up the 21-6 lead at that point, I believe, and it really got them to where they could win the game. The interesting thing in that game is, Mark, you may know, is prior to the game, there was a trade in the NFL, and the Seahawks, the defending Super Bowl champions, traded a name player. This isn't a third-string linebacker. It was Percy Harvin. It's a starting wide receiver returner, supposed game changer, and they made a huge trade to acquire him just a year previous. Barely got anything out of him in the Super Bowl year. Now, granted, in the Super Bowl he returns a kick for a touchdown and was a threat at times, but they won a majority of, if not all, their games without him, and apparently he wasn't a good locker room player. But this is a guy you traded a lot of picks for, signed to a huge contract, and then you traded him away for, I believe, it was 2 tickets to a minor league baseball game.
And a player to be named later, right?
It may be, and I'm afraid that player to be named later is also in high school, so neither one is going to work out well for the Seahawks.
Yeah, definitely an interesting trade. You don't see trades happen very often in the NFL, especially a player that the team itself had just acquired not that much longer before, and had paid a fair amount as far as draft choices. I think to give up 3 draft picks, and then they signed him to a pretty big contract with a lot of guaranteed money. And I think you had said something along the lines as he wasn't that great in the locker room. I think that was kind of a understatement, or maybe you're kind of being kind of nice to Percy Harvin with some of the reports that are coming out. It sounds like he was almost a little bit of a cancer in the locker room. He had gotten in fights with Golden Tate. I think he had also gotten in a fight with maybe Dan Baldwin, and as well with Russell Wilson, the clear leader of the team. So when you're in that kind of situation, when you're fighting with the players and you're disagreeing with the coaches, you're kind of making it about yourself and saying that you need to be featured in a certain way and you need to run certain routes, and you're kind of making it hard on the offensive coordinator. And if you can't play for Pete Carroll, who's one of the known as like probably the best players coach that there is in the NFL, then clearly something has to give. And so I think they pretty much decided that if they can find a trade partner, they're going to come. So they didn't get much out of the Jets, but getting a little bit is better than getting nothing.
Yeah, I think it caught most of us outside Seattle by surprise, because clearly they did a good job of keeping it quiet. But after the trade, then you started hearing some of these stories, like you said, of the Golden Tate, the punch or altercation prior to the Super Bowl, the Doug Baldwin skirmish, I believe, was in training camp. And I can't believe you think Russell Wilson's the leader of the team. I heard it was Percy Harvin. He told me so.
He seems to think he was the leader of the team, but yeah. It seems like, I don't want to make light of the situation, but it sounds like he has a little bit of maybe kind of psychiatric issues going on that maybe need to be resolved, similar to, Brandon Marshall had some issues a few years ago and even admitted as such and was diagnosed with something and has been getting treatment, and now he's, one of the top 10 receivers in the NFL. So, hopefully he can get some kind of treatment. He seems to have a lot of trust issues. He had trust issues in Minnesota with his coach, Brad Childress, and it got to a point where they wanted to trade him, even though he's, an allergic, game-breaking type player. And then Seattle obviously had some trust issues there, and, despite his clear level of talent, they felt like they were better getting rid of him than keeping him on the team. So now he's on his third team. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, because he's on the Jets, which are currently 1-6. Rex Ryan is on the hot seat. So even if he enjoys playing for Rex Ryan and they get along well, and then if the Jets fire Rex Ryan at the end of the season, is Percy Harvin going to feel these trust issues all over again? Because he's going to say, well, I was getting along fine with my coach. I enjoyed playing for my coach. And now he's fired the coach. So now I don't trust the organization anymore. So we'll kind of see how this plays out. But it may not be good.
Yeah, and speaking of not good, the former team for Percy Harvin, the Seahawks, I mentioned the punt return that led to St. Louis being able to win that game. There was also a fake punt late in the game. Now, I will say a bunch of people are calling Jeff Fisher out and saying how great of a call that was. I'm of the belief, and I don't know where you stand on this, Mark, but I'm of the belief that it's not a great call. Honestly, you're basically giving the game away if you fail right. So you saw something on tape, and that's great. It's a courageous, gutsy, well-timed call. But what would have happened if they didn't get it? If the punter throws it incomplete? People are just kill Jeff Fisher today. Well, if that's the case, then it's not a great call. It was a lucky call or a well-timed call, and it took some guts to do it, but it was executed properly, and he had seen the tape and obviously found a weakness in the opposing team's coverage unit. But similar to when Bill Belichick went for it a few years back, speaking of the Brady and Manning, Belichick goes for it on 4th and 2, I believe, and gets stopped, and it set up the Colts at the 30-yard line going in, and they got the score to win the game. And his argument was, well, I didn't want to give Peyton Manning the ball back. If I get that, we win the game. And he's right, but everybody jumped on him. That's a horrible call. If he had gotten it right, wouldn't have everybody have said it was the genius? So I don't like that we always wait for the play to finish, and then we decide that it's either a genius call or a horrible call based on the result. I will say it was a bad call, just like the onside kick in the Super Bowl by the Saints. Bad call, good result.
I agree with you. I think we have way too much of that happening, of people judging the play based on the result. It's kind of like using, a poker analogy. If someone makes a big bet and you decide to, call off most of your stack with pocket fours, even though clearly the other person probably has a higher overpair, and you happen to hit a 4, and you say, man, what a great call. Well, you won the pot. It was a good result, but obviously not a good call. You don't want to put yourself in that situation. And it's a little less black and white in this situation, because like you said with film study, maybe they had seen some tendencies from Seattle, and maybe when they went out there for that punt, they saw exactly what they were looking for from what they had seen on tape. So they kind of were pretty sure. I know on the punt return, they kind of made Seattle think that they were going to run off them, but the ball actually went to Stephen Bailey. I quote that, from film study, they saw that the punter 90% of the time would kick the ball towards the left. So they felt pretty confident in that. And maybe they had a kind of a similar type read on the fake punt. But yeah, I agree. You pretty much, and that's the thing, you have to decide in the split second, like as you see it happening, before you know what's going to happen, you have to decide, okay, do I like this call or not? Is this a good call or not? But the thing is, the play happens so quickly, the whole thing is over within 5 seconds, or they've gained the first down within 5 seconds, and you probably didn't even take the time to digest everything that you were seeing right then and there and make the decision if you like the call or not. So then you're making the decision after the fact, and then of course you're kind of tainted by the result. But yeah, big win for the Rams, big bad loss for the Seahawks. They're now 3-3. But I think people might be overreacting a little bit. It's going to take a little bit of time to reconfigure the offense without Percy Harvin and try to involve some of the other players. That's a couple of rookies from this year's draft, second and fourth round draft picks, so they're going to try to integrate over the next few weeks. But when I look at their schedule, their next 3 games, they're at Carolina. They won that. I think they're like a 3-point favorite because they have to travel across the country. But if they win that, and the next 2 games are at home against the Raiders, obviously a win, and then at home against the Giants, which they should win that as well. So you're looking at, they're 3-3 now, but 3 weeks from now they might be sitting at 6-3, and we'll forget the fact that they were struggling right now. So I think once they're 6-3, we'll be putting them back, into the playoffs, and we'll be trying to, figure out what kind of seed they're going to get. But for now, yeah, struggling just a little bit.
And what's funny about that is they're 3-3, as you mentioned, which puts them firmly in 3rd place in their division. But there's another division, Mark, where if you're 3-3, you're challenging for the division lead, and it's in the NFC as well. It's the NFC South. So the argument all season had been the best division's the NFC West, and it's still with the Cardinals, the Niners, with Seattle, even it's struggling at 3-3. St. Louis now looking like they're a little better. Still looks like a great division. The flip side is the NFC South, where if you are 3-1 or 2-4, you're right in the thick of the race for the division.
Yeah, as far as trying to decide what the best division is or what the worst division is, I think there's a lot of different criteria you can, of course, use. You can look at, who are the best teams in the division and kind of focus on that, or you can look at the bottom of the division and say, okay, how many bad teams in the division? But the NFC South, when I take a quick look at the NFL standings, every single division has at least 2 teams with a positive point differential, except the NFC South, where there are no positive point differentials. All 4 teams have a negative point differential. As you said, the division leader, Carolina Panthers, was 3-1. Then you had 2-4 Saints, the 2-5 Bucks, or 2-5 Falcons, and the 1-5 Bucks. So clearly, that's very good. And some of those wins are even within the division. I know one of Carolina's wins is against Tampa Bay. I know one of Atlanta's wins is against New Orleans. So clearly, their record outside of the division is pretty poor. And based on all the facts here, the point differential, every single other division has at least 1 team with 5 wins. Their best team is 3-1. So I think in this case, it's a pretty clear-cut, easy decision that the NFC South is the worst division in football.
Yeah, and I would definitely echo everything you said there, and I'm guessing that having a negative point differential is bad?
Yeah, it tends to not help you win games when you score less than your opponent.
Interesting. It's a theory. I'm going to have to do some more research on that because your theories sometimes don't hold water, but I'll take you at your word for this one. And noting that the 3-1 Carolina Panthers are leading the way. Could we possibly see that they finish, say, 7-8-1? And would that be enough to win this division?
I would need to do a little more research as far as each of their schedules. Even though Tampa is only 2 games out in the win column, just from what I've seen from them so far, I kind of tend to write Tampa Bay off, especially with the talent of the other teams. Atlanta has been a disappointment so far, 2-5. They've lost 4 in a row. They haven't won since their big win in Tampa Bay. Actually, there's another interdivision win that I didn't account for before. New Orleans is the team that, of course, they were the preseason darlings of a lot of experts. So a lot of people were saying that they not only expected the Saints to win NFC South, but a lot of people were picking them to actually represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And with a 2-4 start, obviously that's not looking too good. But a lot of their losses have been pretty close. I know they lost in Week 1, where they were leading Atlanta late, and then they lost with a late field goal. They lost that game by 3 points. They lost in Cleveland, I think, by 2 points on a late field goal. And then, of course, yesterday they lost to Detroit by 1 point late after leading that game for most of it. So 3 of the 4 losses were very close. Their other loss was at Dallas in a game that was not close at all. But still, they're 2-4, but they could fairly easily, with a little break here or there, be 5-1. So at this point, I would still expect the Saints to win the division. I would need to look at the remaining schedule, but I have to think the Saints could probably get at least to 9-7.
Well, let's hope you're right, because we always hate to see that 500 or less team making the playoffs. Just always leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But from that, let's transition to a new friend of the podcast. So you just mentioned the Cleveland Browns with that nice win against New Orleans Week 2, I believe it was, by 2 points, as you said, late field goal. And just last week, you and I were talking about, wow, the Browns have put it together. They might actually be able to go into Jacksonville, go home and host Oakland, and play Tampa Bay. They're going to go on this roll, and they're going to get to 6-2, and they're going to be right in the thick of the AFC playoff hunt. And apparently Gus Bradley listens to the podcast, used this properly to motivate the team, and Jacksonville went out and got their first win of the season, and we can stop talking about the Cleveland Browns and 6-2 and playoff possibilities at this point until they show us something different.
Yeah, when you lose to an 0-5, or no, they were 0-6. When you lose to an 0-6 Jacksonville team, I don't care if it was on the road or not, I'm writing you off. So, we gave the Browns a chance last week. I'm now writing them off. It was funny, it was in Week 3, just 3 weeks into the season, we came up with a list of 7 teams from the AFC, and we said, okay, the 6 AFC playoff teams are going to come from this list of 7. I've changed a little bit now. I think I'm going to I have a list of 5. That 5 is the Patriots, the Ravens, the Colts, the Broncos, and the Chargers, all 5 of which were on our original list of 7. I'm going to say those 5 are pretty safe. All 5 of those teams have at least 5 wins. They're all sitting on top of their division, except for the Chargers, who are in the same division with Denver, half game back. Those 5 teams are in. I'd be very surprised if one of those 5 teams does not make it. For the 6th playoff spot, who knows? I mean, I'm looking at it. It could be Buffalo. It could be Miami. It could be Cincinnati. It could be Pittsburgh. They beat Houston tonight. It could be Houston. Maybe they turn things around once they get Jadeveon Clowney back. It could be Kansas City. So that's a list of, I don't know how many they list off there, 6 or 7. I think any one of those teams might be the 6th playoff team in the NFC. But the other 5, lock them up.
Yeah, I agree. Lock those bad boys up. And I think of the teams you mentioned going for that 6th playoff spot, we'd thrown in the Bengals and Steelers before as pretty safe bets to make it. I think one of them probably still will. But if you're looking for teams trending in the wrong direction, look no further than the Cincinnati Bengals. They won after Week 3, making them 3-0, going into their bye week, the early bye, which apparently stifled all their momentum. They came out of that bye. People were talking about they might be the best team in football. They haven't won since. They lost at New England, embarrassingly. They tied at home to Carolina, embarrassingly. And they got shut out at Indianapolis. They have looked pretty horrible for the last 3 weeks and haven't won in over a month, I believe now. So they aren't a team that's trending in the right direction. Pittsburgh has looked shaky. Tonight they actually turned it around, got a win against Houston, so they feel at least like they're going in the right direction. Maybe they'll get healthier on defense, and that'll get them there. But beyond that, I mean, Kansas City? Can Kansas City really make the playoffs again? Can the AFC West put 3 in again? I can't put it past them. Buffalo, can Kyle Orton really lead a team to the playoffs? I just said that out loud and it made no sense. I'm pretty sure that the voices in my head are telling me, stop, you're lying.
Yeah, it's crazy as far as that sixth playoff spot. You mentioned could the Chiefs do it? So I pulled up the schedule real quick. They are at home this week against St. Louis. Obviously, they're the favorite. They get to figure they have a decent chance. They got a pretty good home field advantage. The week after that, they're at home against the Jets. Again, 1-6 Jets. They're still playing hard. They just added Percy Harvin, but again, I'm going to give the Chiefs the advantage in that game. And then we mentioned the Bills as a possible playoff team. They're 4-3. In Week 10, you have the Chiefs at the Bills. As weird as it may sound, that's almost kind of a playoff elimination game. Like whoever loses that game might be done, but the Chiefs could potentially win that game at Buffalo. They could be sitting at 6-3, or at least 5-4 after Week 10. So I would say they are still in it. They haven't even played Oakland yet, so they still have 2 more bye weeks on their schedule. Wait, did I say bye weeks? Well, basically, those are 2 pretty much automatic wins. So yeah, I think the Chiefs are still alive. I think Buffalo's still alive. I think Houston, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Miami looked decent. They almost beat Green Bay the previous week, and then they went to Chicago and pretty much led that entire game. And obviously, Cutler has some turnover issues that we won't deal with. But Miami looked good. They created those turnovers. So yeah, there's a long list of teams that are going to be fighting for that 6th and final playoff spot.
And you mentioned bye weeks and Kansas City, which is amazing because Andy Reid now is 14-2 coming off a bye. I think we should all just accept when Kansas City comes off the bye, or whatever team Andy Reid is coaching at that time, you might want to pencil them in for a win in your survivor pool. If you were somehow thinking San Diego was a safe bet at home this week, you probably got burned by that. And hopefully no one was silly enough to think that. But Andy Reid, it's remarkable. 14-2 after the bye. That just seems ridiculous, and yet it's true.
It's a pretty crazy stat, and it makes me wonder, when the schedule comes out next year, so when the 2015 schedule gets announced sometime next April, are the coaches, of the teams, do they look at that? And is one of the first things they look at to see, okay, what week is Kansas City to the bye, and do I play them the following week? Because if so, I'm kind of screwed. I don't know how to combat his bye week magic, but yeah, that's a pretty crazy stat. 14-2 after a bye. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but some of those teams even have losing records. So it's not just that he's always had really good teams. I mean, and this was the same case this year as well. They were 2-3 coming off their bye. So out of those 14 wins, I think at least 5 of them are from a team that had a losing record at the time. So yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you spoke of future bye weeks for him, so I wonder if the post-Oakland games actually do qualify. We'll have to watch his record there. We may have to put a little asterisk if he wins those games and say it's 14-2, but could be 16-2 after the Oakland games, just for fun. Speaking of the Oakland Raiders, Mark, near and dear to your heart and your house, I believe with Jacksonville and Gus Bradley, friend of the podcast, winning their game this week, that leaves one winless team in the NFL. Do you know who that is?
Well, I honestly think you could ask me that question at any point during any season from anywhere within the last 6 or 7 years, and probably for the next 6 or 7 years going forward. And if I wasn't sure, I think my default answer would be the Raiders. Just as if if you get a baseball trivia question about something about titles or something about a team being good and you don't know, just guess the Yankees or Babe Ruth if it's a individual person question. Same as the bizarro opposite of that in the NFL. If you get a question about who was bad or who has a losing streak or who hasn't qualified for the playoffs in a long time, just guess the Raiders. It's just the default answer. You're gonna be right a fair amount of the time. They're 0-6. They look bad. They've one of their losses was to the Jets, which to this point is their only win. And when I look at the schedule, they still have some tough games left. They still have 2 games against Denver. They still have the 2 games against the Chiefs that we just talked about. They still have to play at San Diego. They still have to play the Niners. They have to play at Seattle. Obviously, that's a loss. If the Raiders were to somehow go into Seattle and win, I think that might be just go ahead and document that as the biggest upset of this century or this decade at the very least. But they have two potential wins on the schedule. One of them is actually this week at Cleveland. Again, Cleveland should win that game. They are the favorite, but you at least have to give Oakland a fighter's chance. And then week 16, the Raiders are at home against the Bills. We'll see where the Bills stand. At that point, the Bills may or may not still be fighting for a playoff spot. But outside of those 2 weeks, any win by them would be a complete fluke.
Yeah, and the Cleveland game you mentioned actually has some history going against it being a win for the Raiders, or even a possible win, because I believe Cleveland's located in the Eastern time zone. Oakland, historically, in the last decade, or maybe more, doesn't travel east well, and definitely doesn't get a result when they travel east.
Well, the weird thing here, though, is the game is a 4:25 Eastern kickoff, so Oakland does catch a little bit of a break there. That way they're not having to kick off at 10 a.m. for their body clocks. It's at least a 1:25 West Coast body clock, if that makes any sense, kickoff for the Raiders. So they get a little bit of a break there, but they don't get a break in the fact that Cleveland just lost to the Jags. So I have to call up the Elias Sports Bureau and get some kind of expert research on this, but the Cleveland Browns just lost to the 0-6 Jaguars. Now they turn around the next week and play the 0-6 Raiders. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that may be one of the worst case scenarios as far as losing to two winless teams back to back with that many losses. So if you lost to 0-6 teams back to back weeks, it would be typical Cleveland Browns. I joked earlier about how bad Oakland is. Obviously, Cleveland has their fair share of misery as well, but losing in back-to-back weeks to 0-6 teams, that would probably be in the top 5 for Cleveland Brown misery.
And what would be worse about that is that they would have had a winning record the first week and a 500 record the second week. So they would have been at or above 500 and lost consecutive games to 0-6 teams, which I'm pretty sure if you start narrowing down that criteria, that might be the only time in history that a team with a winning or 500 record loses consecutive weeks to 0-6 or worse teams. I'm not going to say I know that for a fact, but it seems like that would be pretty rare. So here's the Cleveland winning. And speaking of winning, I did want to bring up a couple other points before we jump into our new weekly segments. Because winning is what Deshaun Jackson is all about, Mark. And by winning, I mean himself. Winning his battle, winning his stat war. Because Deshaun Jackson apparently isn't about winning games or caring about his team. For those that don't know, Mark, I'll let you explain the play or the situation we're going to be talking about here. But clearly Deshaun Jackson wants to win a big contract for himself.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson has always been kind of one of my least favorite players. He's all about himself. It seems to be all he cares about. I remember how many years ago this was, probably, 3, 4, 5, something like that. I think it was a primetime game, maybe a Monday night game. The one where he was on the breakaway towards the end zone and basically dropped the ball at the 1 yard line or half-yard line, costing his team a touchdown because he just dropped the ball before actually crossing the end zone because he wanted to bring attention to himself with some stupid celebration that actually was a celebration of nothing because there was nothing to celebrate. But in yesterday's game, Washington was down by 1 point. They were driving. I think there was somewhere around a minute to go. They were around Tennessee's 40 or 45-yard line. So they're getting almost in field goal range. And McCoy, Sean Jackson is running down the sideline. McCoy throws the ball to him. The Tennessee defender grabs Jackson from behind. He gets the flag, which is what he wanted, and it was probably a justifiable flag. But instead of just kind of going back to the huddle, now you get the penalty. You're going to be in easy field goal range. You should win the game at this point. You've pretty much locked up a victory. Okay, but instead, Sean Jackson decides to taunt the guy. It's all up in his face, up in his grill. He's chest to chest. He's taunting him. They're basically face mask to face mask. Just imagine some of the things that he's saying. For some reason, the referee decides to not throw the flag, but kind of wish that he had, because he was definitely taunting the guy. Taunting does not just have to be after a touchdown, but he could have very easily, gotten the taunting flag, gotten 15 yards, basically put them back where they were before, and potentially cost the team the game. So he's quite lucky, but I can definitely see if a play like that, where Chip Kelly was like, you know what, you're a talented player, you're a very good wide receiver, but I'm just not dealing with your headaches anymore.
Yeah, I mean, all you need to know is that Chip Kelly decided I'd be better off with Deshaun Jackson and his game-breaking speed and over-the-top ability, and I'd rather have Riley Cooper as my second wide receiver with Jeremy Maclin. If that doesn't tell you all you need to know about Deshaun Jackson as a player in the locker room and with his coaches, I don't think you need to watch football anymore. And with that, Mark, I want us to introduce a new segment to our listeners. Each week, we've been giving multipliers and multipluies of the week, but prior to that now, we're going to start introducing something that's near and dear to your heart. It's going to be called Hef's Hates. This is going to give you a chance to vent on a topic, usually fantasy football related, but at times it'll be just culture or world related as well, and really give us your take on what makes you very upset in the world. So without further ado, here's Hef's Hates.
Yes, thank you. Well, I do have quite a long list of things that I hate, probably a much longer list than it should be, and many of them will be about driving and bad drivers, but I won't go there to start. I will keep the first one at least fantasy related. So I listen to a fair amount of other podcasts as well, and one of the ones that I listen to is from ESPN. They have their fantasy football podcast, and I just find it funny when they mention some of the players that are available, usually on Tuesday or Wednesday of the week, when I talk about some free agents that are available, and some other articles as well. I have an article every Tuesday as far as, free agent fines or whatever it's called. And all the data that they use is from the ESPN, quote-unquote, standard leagues. Well, as it turns out, a standard league at ESPN is a 10-team league with a not very deep bench and non-PPR. So I have a few problems with that. The fact that, to me, I think a standard league, and it's been my experience from playing at many different sites and many different leagues with many different people, a standard league seems to be 12. Standard is there's at least a semi-decent bench where you can have, a backup defense if you want, and backup tight end, and have a little bit of depth and maneuverability to be able to navigate through bye weeks and injuries. And at least, within the last 5 years, PPR tends to be much more common, whether it's full-point PPR or half-point PPR or even three-quarter-point PPR. But instead, ESPN is different than all three of those things. And so when they talk about free agent fines, either on the podcast or in the articles, and they say stuff like, oh, yeah, you should, I remember acting like this is, like back in week 2 or 3, and they're like, oh, yeah, you should really go pick up Kelvin Benjamin. He's available in 57% of leagues, and it just baffles. Like, no league that I know of is he available that frequently. And the other one was Zach Ertz. Like, you should pick up Zach Ertz. He's available in 73% of leagues or whatever the number was, and it's just insane. Like, they're providing these numbers and advice about picking up players that most people that are listening, it's not even close to being available in their leagues. Like, it's just, you're giving out advice, and it is completely incompatible with most leagues for the people that are listening. So that is the first edition of F-Seats.
So wait, you're telling me DeMarco Murray isn't available in most leagues?
Well, no. In fact, I'm trying to think of even if you had a league where you started one QB, one running back, one receiver, like if you had that small of a league, and even if it was a 4-team league, so let's say you had a 4-team league where you started QB, a running back, and a receiver, he wouldn't even be available in that league. So no, there was no league on earth where he would be available.
All right. Well, I will agree with your hate on the ESPN standard league reference because, yes, if you read those free agent find articles, they are so meaningless in any league that has any depth and 12 teams. And it's so great when they say, now that there's been an injury in the backfield, or Trey Mason has broken out after, and they do it after 2 or 3 weeks of performance. I'm sorry, but by then every player has been picked up, or probably was to begin with. So great job there, Hef. It is something that I think most of our listeners would also be able to identify with and hate. And I look forward to some of your tales of driving in the Bay and some of your other worldly hates around stats, newspapers, anything else you want to throw in the future. So that was our Hef's Hate segment. Now we'll move on to our other weekly segment, the Multiplier and Multiplier of the Week. So the Multiplier, again, goes to the best use of the multiplier, the Multiplier, the worst use of the multiplier. So Hef, why don't you give us who you feel was the Multiplier of the Week?
Multiplier of the Week, I think we have a few candidates. We saw some 2X's on Randall Cobb. Had a pretty good game. I think he had something like 6 catches, 120 yards, and a touchdown. So got some good value there. We had some 2X multipliers on Andre Ellington. Again, good game. Good strategy because of the good matchup with Oakland. You got to figure that Arizona's going to get a lead and maybe get some touches for Ellington. And he actually did most of his damage through the air in that game. And then we saw some 3X's this week on Arian Foster, who had a decent game, but not great. And then we had a 3X as well on Jamal Charles, who had a pretty good game and carried that team to second place for the week, finishing just a few points behind first place for the week.
All right. So you're going to go with Jamal Charles as the Multiplier of the Week.
Yes.
Which, in fairness, gets the team to second place, where had they gone with a 2x multiplier instead of 3x or multiplied someone else, they probably would have finished middle of the pack. So that is, by definition, the good use of the multiplier. On the flip side, the Multiplier of the Week, it's going to be a team award, because the Cleveland Browns offense apparently didn't make the trip to Florida. And unfortunately, a few of our players believed the Cleveland Browns would be showing up in Florida and performing well against a winless Jags team. So the Multiplier of the Week goes to the entire Cleveland Browns offense, but mainly in the form of Brian Hoyer and Isaiah Crowell. Now, Mark, you might have remembered in our previous podcast, we've mentioned how safe it is to multiply a quarterback. Quarterbacks, just by default, you're going to get a couple hundred yards passing. Against a bad defense like the Jags and a bad team, you're probably going to get a touchdown or two even in a bad game. That's going to get you into the double digits, so it's pretty safe to multiply a quarterback. Brian Hoyer, on the other hand, against a bad defense like the Jags, can barely break 200 yards and can't find the end zone. So that doesn't actually lend itself well to a multiplier situation because he only gets you about 6.5 points. The sad thing is, that 6.5 points before the multiplier is still better than Isaiah Crowell after the multiplier. So I will just throw out there that the Browns offense, namely Brian Hoyer, Isaiah Crowell, great job, guys. Multiplier of the Week.
I'll add one quick thing as well. The team that multiplied Isaiah Crowell this week is the same team that multiplied
Andrew
Hawkins in the previous week. And Andrew Hawkins in that game had 0 catches for 0 yards. And of course, naturally, against Jacksonville the very next week, Andrew Hawkins had 5 catches for 112 yards, something like that. So just really bad timing. The other interesting thing is that team also has Jordan Cameron on their team, but I'm pretty sure they've already multiplied Jordan Cameron. So now that they've gotten their multipliers on those 3 Cleveland Brown players out of the way, hopefully they can start making some better multiplier decisions going forward.
Yeah, obviously, unless after I drop Brian Hoyer, they pick Brian Hoyer up to multiply him, they probably won't have a chance to multiply any Browns the rest of the way, which is good news, the way the Browns offense performed. So thanks again, Cleveland Browns. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our Week 7 podcast. So hopefully you learned something. Mark gave you some gambling tidbits. We went over some of the playoff pictures and introduced our new segment, which I think everyone will grow to love, Hef's Hates. So Mark, anything you want to say before we sign off tonight?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I guess the one thing that we didn't touch on this week is potential suggestions for Survivor Leagues. I think, as far as the best options this week, you've got the Patriots at home against the Bears. That one kind of scares me a little bit. The Bears have played much better on the road this year, and you got to figure they're kind of, pissed off. They that game, it scares me a little bit. It just seems like something that Cleveland would do to lose that game. And then the safest one is probably the Monday night game. The Cowboys are at home against Washington. They're a 10-point favorite. Washington is playing really well. We're not even sure who's going to be the QB of this game. You're either going to have RG3 coming off of his injury and possibly being able to rush after being out for over a month, or you're going to have the third stringer as of 24 hours ago, Colt McCoy, coming in to start this game. So it would seem fairly safe. Dallas at home on Monday night is probably your best bet for Survivor Leagues.
Yeah, I know we hate to take the divisional games, but some of these weeks have been really tricky with the way the games line up. So I do agree with you. Avoid the Bears-Patriots matchup if you have other options. It does seem like a situation where the Bears have been playing better on the road, and when teams face dire situations, that's usually when they play their best. And either the Bears are about to turn around and play the best game of the season, or they're about to go on an 8-game losing streak. So we're going to see after this week which way they're headed. But with that, I think we can wrap up Week 7, put a nice tidy bow on it, and wish everyone well. Don't forget to check out our website, steelscorpionsports.com, a better species of fantasy football. You can find out more about mulligans, multipliers, and the all-play format at steelscorpionsports.com. So with that, signing off from San Diego, I'm Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, I'm Mark Heflin.
All right, sports fans, talk to you next week.